Artificial intelligence is the present and the future of healthcare. Doctors will have to learn it, to use it ethically and responsibly. This should be a change with the doctors and not just to the doctors. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and healthcare enthusiasts. Welcome to episode 4 of the Decoding AI in Healthcare series. I am Dr. Harshita, Community Engagement Manager at MedSynapse. Today, our topic of discussion is AI and the healthcare workforce. The intersection of artificial intelligence and healthcare has become a focal point in our rapidly evolving world. It's a topic that touches every aspect of healthcare, from patient care and diagnosis to administrative tasks and research. The integration of AI has the potential to reshape the healthcare landscape, making it more efficient, accessible, and patient-centric. And today we have a truly enlightening session ahead. Let's begin by introducing our first speaker, Mr. Tim Simard. Tim is not only a healthcare innovator and entrepreneur, but also a thought leader with a rich history in technology and healthcare. With more than 25 years of experience, including his work on the NASA Space Shuttle and his role as a National Science Foundation mentor, Tim brings a unique perspective to the AI in healthcare conversation. His passion for advancing science and technology innovations is evident in his extensive career, which spans from the building complex solutions for Fortune 1000 companies to mentoring emerging companies working on cutting-edge AI applications in drug discovery and clinical research. Tim's insights into the complex landscape of healthcare, technology, and entrepreneurship are invaluable, and we are privileged to have him share his expertise with us today. Welcome, Tim.
Well, thank you very much. I very much appreciate being here.
Now, let's extend a warm welcome to Dipu Patel, a digital health consultant who is back with us for this episode. As the Vice Chair for Innovation and Professor at the University of Pittsburgh DPS program, Dipu's unique blend of clinical expertise and tech-savvy insights have made her a leading voice in the field. In her previous appearance, she shared her valuable insights into the transformative power of artificial intelligence in the healthcare. And today she returns to enrich our understanding even further on AI and the healthcare workforce. Both of our esteemed speakers bring a wealth of knowledge and expertise to the table, and we are privileged to have them here today to explore the fascinating intersection of AI and the healthcare workforce. So without any further ado, let's dive into this enriching discussion. And the audience, please feel free to engage with our speakers by sharing your questions and comments throughout the session in the comment section. Thank you everyone for joining us, and let's get started on this exciting journey. Over to you, Dipu.
Thank you so much, Harshita. I am so excited to present and have a chat with Tim Samard. We are going to talk about AI and the healthcare workforce and the future of the workforce. So welcome to episode 4. Let's dive right in. Tim, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with us and share your insights. Why don't you share with us a little bit about your journey? Harshita spoke a little bit about it, but dive a little deeper into the details. I'm particularly interested in the NSH Foundation mentoring, as well as working on the space shuttle.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me, each of you. I'm honored to be among really thought leaders in AI and in medicine in general. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm excited to share some of my both experiences and what might be some of my insights as to where we've been and where we might be going. Because healthcare is a challenging environment, but at the same point in time, I think we are on the precipice of what I consider almost phenomenal and incredible change, if not algorithmic, in its nature around AI, and I should say logarithmic change. And so I look forward to sharing that and see if I can be helpful.
Thank you,
So
Tim.
I started my career as a software engineer for the space shuttle, for the NASA space shuttle. I was 23 years old. I really didn't know a lot about what I was doing at that time. I had just graduated in computer science and economics, and I was looking at the idea of doing something socially impactful. And what I wanted to do, and I just got really lucky while I lived in Los Angeles, California, to get the opportunity to work on the space shuttle as a software engineer. And as a software engineer at 23 years old, before it flew, which dates me a little bit, but recognizes the idea that innovation and phenomenal change, whether that's aerospace or education, manufacturing, entertainment, it really brings to the forefront that technology is a major driver in these various industries, but also significant drivers around humanity. And that's what I'm really interested in, is how can technology and innovation and entrepreneurs really move the needle, so to speak, around humanity, but also specifically healthcare, and how does the technology, the organizational design that you might achieve, and then the innovation or problem that you're trying to typically solve, and how can that be considered, something that is really profound in what I call transformational innovation. I spent time at the National Science Foundation in this I-Corps program, and helping life science companies and biotech and manufacturing companies basically go to market, typically very bleeding edge kinds of innovations. And we always look at it from a very much of a 360-degree perspective. The two kind of principles that I look at when I'm mentoring organizations and companies, whether consulting or mentoring, is to think about what's a common vocabulary, so that we can think of our team as a global potential team. The diversity is very important. The inclusion is very important. If we have a common vocabulary, we can start talking about these kind of transformative drivers or innovations and journeys for where we want to go and what we want to do. And I think in a much more efficient way, and one that actually, again, creates more commonality around our humanity and around our ability to communicate as we move forward in this journey called transformation and innovation, and especially in healthcare, because healthcare has a special mission around driving better health and wellness outcomes. And our why is that we believe everyone deserves access to care. Our values and vision and mission are around the idea of increasing access to care, especially for underserved communities and populations, and to empower clinicians everywhere. And that's kind of our underlying kind of principles. I think it's important for us to recognize what those are. So with that, I'll leave it with the idea of National Science Foundation, and one of the projects I did around AI was with a professor at Northeastern University, Professor Gunther, who was focused on the idea of reducing the cycle time in drug discovery. And the idea was to triangulate on these multiple points of disciplines, so physics, biology, chemistry, and technology, and to create a simulation capability around those 3 and 4 disciplines. And I think it provides an example of how AI, and particularly where ChatGPT and large language modules and things like that are actually so impactful today and are much better understood today than they were even 3 or 4 years ago, are really driving inherent capabilities of learning and connecting dots across these or data points across these various phases so that we can actually get better insights based on more numerous data points, and to the point of getting a generative AI kind of outcome where it's actually assimilating these different data points to create new insights and new outcomes that we wouldn't or even can't possibly do as a human being. There are guardrails that we need to do, but that's one example. I did that about 3 years ago. And again, trying to reduce the cycle time that it takes to actually drive drug discovery, which is up until recently has been very much of a kind of best guess. This is where I think the right direction for this particular clinical trial might be, or this phase 1 might be. So that's one area in which I think it exemplifies the value of machine learning and AI, and we can talk about that a little bit more. But that's the NASA idea. Was I was 23 and I was pushing the envelope, and I think at 60 I'm pushing the envelope again in terms of healthcare, because I think from a existential perspective, I think the environment and healthcare, or medicine in general, are two areas in which we can have tremendous impact over the next decade.
That's amazing, Tim. And I think you've accomplished a lot. And you're right. And I think if I was listening correctly, I think you said humanity at least 4 times in your answer. And I think you and I have had this conversation offline about how, yes, we are harnessers and advocates of technology, AI specifically in our case, but we are also very much at putting the human and humanity at the core of the technology that we're deploying, developing, or researching. So that kind of brings me to the point of, you gave a great example of how AI is impacting research and development of drug discovery. I would probably say that the mRNA vaccine was probably along those lines in terms of its discovery, and look at what it's done for us as a global community. But shifting to more traditional healthcare roles that we think of, physicians and healthcare providers, OTs, PTs, all of our allied health workforces on a global level. As you know, I could cite statistic after statistic that there's going to be a shortfall in terms of healthcare providers and teams on a global level across the board, whether it be primary care or specialty care. It just depends on what country or what region you live in terms of the shortfall that you're going to see. So how do you envision, or what do you foresee how AI will either augment or change the roles of these various healthcare professionals on a global level?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't think we should lose sight of it either. So we get so caught up in the technical aspect, the technology component, and sometimes we forget the purpose of the technology. And so that's why computer science and economics and so on is that where we apply that. So this is my 3rd healthcare startup, and the journey for me was when I was working at the University of Minnesota on creating a new enterprise platform to provide pharmacists with the toolbox necessary to provide what we call holistic care, and also secondarily personalized care. The example there is that pharmacists are really the backstop before we oftentimes end up in critical care or an emergency room or something. Higher cost of care, higher venue, etc. So a pharmacist is extraordinarily well educated, and yet because of some dynamics in the environment, i.e. consolidation of pharmacies, we saw a kind of relegation of their services to filling a bottle with prescriptions and not necessarily providing patient care. And what we wanted to do was look at that role as it pertained to patient care delivery and see if we could redefine it with a new set of tools. And so that's an example, and I think pharmacists are moving in that direction for sure. And that was 9 years of my life, so I know a lot of my pharmacists are really good friends. And I'm not a clinician, but I hang out with them a lot, is what they used to always say. And that's an understatement. As you and I can vouch for, right?
You're an honorary clinician.
Exactly. Thank you. So the role of the healthcare worker is going to change even more dramatically in the next 10 years, 3, 5, 10 years, more dramatically than we've ever seen before. And what we have to think about is that role is going to have a technology component to it. And so that role and skill set, which I think are two really important components in the idea of managing a workforce, is the role is what we traditionally use in hierarchical structure, and a skill development is what we typically use when we think of a matrixed organization. And as we think about how we deliver care, how we build those skills, and the idea that healthcare has enormous amounts of pressure on it to primarily from the frontline workers to deliver this high quality care and do it with reduced cycle times, i.e. time in which they can visit a patient, as well as the amount of information that they're simply just faced with every single day. And what we have to do is think about what are those tools that we can bring to the forefront to help frontline clinicians, frontline healthcare workers around the world be better equipped to deal with the challenges of the fact that there's an imbalance between the supply of healthcare workers and clinicians like yourself, Dipu, and the need for care, particularly when we start bifurcating or segmenting industrial countries with emerging countries, with low resource countries. And how can we think outside the box, which is a big part of where I spend my time, of how we can create more equitable care. And I think that that's where AI is actually going to really going to give us a window of opportunity on how we can really change that gestalt around access to care, for instance. And I'll just note that Stanford Healthcare, the medical college, had an article about 3 years ago on democratizing healthcare, and their whole perspective was how to use AI in healthcare to increase better access to care, to address inequities, to address inherent biases in care. And we can do this. There's a lot we can do that we haven't done yet. A lot of that has to do with education. A lot of that has to do with priorities of resources. A lot of it has to do with commitment. But let's recognize that we just got through a pandemic. In today's world, we have to live with a world with pandemics and anticipate we'll have another one and another one. And so we have to anticipate new workforce models, which is where future work comes in. Around workforce, I talk about workforce, and work is a human endeavor. And how do we do that with a sense of purpose and a sense of equity for both the clinician and the patient?
I think that you're absolutely right. And I think I was smiling in the middle because you touch on all the things that I advocate for from a different lens, right? So frontline workers, clinicians, healthcare workers, patients, and the education. And we are at a moment in history, I think, or at least an inflection point in history where it's not transformation. As you've said, it's transformative innovation. It's more revolutionary what is happening in terms of technology and the fact of what AI can do in terms of truly having the ability to democratize access to care, no matter what country you're in, no matter what health system you have in your country. This particular tool, and it is a tool, it's not something that's going to take over the world, so to speak, at least not yet, in my opinion, but It is a tool that truly has the ability to democratize as all the things that you said: access to care, improve outcomes we don't even know we should be looking for, because our human brains cannot process the long-term implications as well as an algorithm can, and potentially help us. And as a clinician who has worked in the quote pre-AI era, having to read chart upon chart, whether it's on a screen in an EMR or physical chart, there's only so much information I can put in my head and process to take care of the patient who is in front of me. And I think AI is going to really change that. It'll summarize, thousands of health records for a particular patient and say, okay, this is what you need to do in the context of this patient who's sitting in front of you with chest pain or hypertension or diabetes, and really allow for precision, personalized care that you mentioned. So in terms of that, the ability of us as clinicians, so those of us who are practicing, as well as the new generation of clinicians that are coming, you mentioned about skilling up the workforce. What skills do you think are going to be most important in the future? So let's start with those of us who are already practicing and out there, whether we're educators or practicing clinicians, frontline healthcare workers. What do we need to know about what we should do to upskill ourselves in our current workforce?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think the first thing that we have to do is just get educated. And there's lots of resources about, what is AI, what is machine learning? I mean, because there's, on the front page of the Time magazine, almost 8 months ago, AI, ChatGPT were on the front page. I think what we need to do is recognize the education is key. I think that convergence of clinical roles and technology roles is going to be much more explicit. So in other words, I worked at University of California for several years, and I was a data administrator. I looked at data, and here it is. And I'll just even rewind a little bit. My first AI class, which was a long time ago, I only won't say the number of years because it was a long time ago, at Stanford, was around AI, and our exercise was to take things off the table and put things on the table, and did the table know that we took things off and put things back on? And that was 30 years ago, maybe a little bit more. And what we're talking about now is something similar, but we have really good understanding about how to think about transformative innovation. I mean, we can start with the internet. We can go back to the radio, and it takes 75 years to get 50 million people. And I think Angry Birds took 3 days to get 50 million people. If you want to, Angry Birds is good for frontline workers sometimes, as well as frustrated technologists. So the speed with which we're changing and adopting technologies, it's mind-blowing and it's mind-boggling. And when we hear our friends like Anthony Chang and others talk about how healthcare is going to change over the next 1 to 3 to 6 to 10 years, I quote Steve Jobs, who obviously founded Apple and stuff. In 2000, when he took over Apple again, just before it failed, and Microsoft lent it $50 million to let it survive, so there was competitiveness in the market. And he said, we're going to innovate our way out of this. We're not going to budget our way out of this. And I think that is true with healthcare, is certainly with equity is what, my mission is to increase access to care for all people. To do that, I'm using all these different workforce models, these different delivery systems, and intelligence underlying all that is the machine learning and AI engine that drives and what I call optimizes a scarce human talent, which is people like yourself, caregivers and healthcare professionals. And how do we leverage that from a global perspective rather than from a local geography perspective? Because that that will never win. But the democratizing healthcare for AI, using AI by Stanford was a really good, I think, article about 3 or 4 years ago. That was kind of really, I thought it hit the nail on the head on what we had to do. And that's before I mean, I was just on a panel the other day, and a physician saying that their organization says, well, AI is important, but if we're not ready for it, or AI is not ready for us. And the thing is, to answer your question along about way, Dipu, is you have to jump in now. So two things are happening. The technologists and the clinicians are merging their roles in some fashion. Technologists are going to medical school, and medical school folks and healthcare professionals and education are taking data science classes. They're taking machine learning classes. They're taking development or programming classes. But what's going to happen is, one, the speed with which this has happened, and I mentioned we've got some good examples out there for how innovation transformed ourselves as a society. And it's easy to think of the internet, for instance, and how long it took us to, with Mosaic, and how in the mid 90s, and so how that progressed to where we are today. Well, what's happening with hardware, for instance, went from like mainframe, big 360, 370s to client server to PCs to laptops to iPods to, it's getting smaller, smaller and smaller and smarter and smarter and smarter. And so we've got, I think, examples in our current experience, as professionals, to look back and say, how did that innovation, that breakthrough, evolve, and what were the mistakes we made, and what can we do this time, recognizing that this is not just a blip on the screen, but this is transformative innovation. And the question oftentimes asked, where in healthcare is AI going to be impactful? And I'm saying, where isn't it going to be impactful?
Where isn't it? Yes, absolutely. Where isn't it going to be impactful? I completely agree with you. And I think part of it, one of the things, so I look at it from both a clinician point of view as well as an educator. And one of the things that I often hear people say, particularly educators and clinicians likewise, but are, well, why should I have to learn this piece of technology? Why should I learn AI? I have 20 plus years of experience. I'm probably going to be working for another 10 or so. I'm looking to retire. Why should I learn it? And the answer I give, and I'd love to hear your version of this answer, is as healthcare workers and healthcare professionals, we are committed to lifelong learning. I do not practice medicine as I did 20 years ago. And I know there are providers out there who practiced before imaging technology evolved to where it is in its current state. And so just like we don't prescribe the same medications we didn't prescribe 20 years ago for a particular condition, because evidence-based medicine has proven that we need to evolve with that, I see this as just another part of our learning journey as healthcare providers. Additionally, the second part of that for me is patients are going to demand it if they're not already demanding, right? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on those two aspects of the workforce.
Yeah, I think what I'll go with that is, at some point it's going to be like using a stethoscope.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's a tool. It's just an information-based tool, and it's not a stethoscope. It's not a pulsometer. It's not a blood pressure, cuff, but it's a tool. And to your point, when we think about the supply and the demand, we have to get smarter about how we're using technology, and even more so, how we can help the clinician have better job satisfaction, given the enormous amounts of constraints around their time and their energy and their just basic human capabilities. And I would argue that the reason why we have such an issue around burnt out clinicians, from doctors to nurses to bedside to frontline workers, which is what inspires me to keep going, is because I don't have those talents that you have, but I have other talents, and I want to push the potential for what we call a more agile, a more resilient, and a more sustainable workforce for the 21st century. And we're not going to do that using the current paradigms we have from a workforce perspective and how much we, expect from frontline workers in terms of, and when pandemics hit was an extreme, but still there's a toxic work environment out there for a variety of reasons. And there's an issue of just access to care, especially for the underserved communities and populations, that we as a society have to do something there. And I think we talk about working really hard to create win-win solutions. And that's what we're trying to do in terms of using entrepreneurship as a pathway to empowerment, because it gives you the ability to decide your schedule. It gives you the ability to decide what role do you want to play in healthcare. It gives you the choice of recognizing that you can do more with less if the less is the right components or elements of technology and services and people. And that's what we're trying to work toward.
I think it's a wonderful goal, and I really hope that this comes to fruition, because a lot of the work that you're doing, Tim, in this space. First, I want to highlight that what you're doing is truly the new, innovative way of thinking about interprofessional and team-based practice. It's cross industries, right? Historically, in healthcare, we think of interprofessional and team-based practice as doctors, PAs, NPs, PTs, OTs, pharmacists, all of us working together. Now we are crossing industries, business and manufacturing and medical device management and computer science and technology, all of these data scientists, all of them coming together to be on a truly global interprofessional team to provide patient care and improve patient outcomes and improve patient access, right? So I think that's a great thing. One of the things that, and I'd love for us to kind of pivot a little bit and talk about the policy and ethical implications of AI on the workforce. Because one of the things that what you were saying, Tim, is how do you improve access by using technology as a platform and democratize the ability for anybody to access care anywhere from a patient point of view, but then also from a provider point of view to avoid clinical burnout, so that I can see patients on my schedule, but the patients don't feel abandoned, right? There's a clinician, there's a partner with me in the form of another provider or a platform or a bot who is there to help that patient feel completely seen and heard and taken care of. So what do you think the policy implications are, and then the ethical implications as we evolve as a society?
Yeah, I think they're complicated. So first, I wanted to mention that we're really speaking to a global audience, and so we always want to be respectful of both cultural and geographical uniqueness and challenges and opportunities. So I always try to keep that in the front of my mind, is to kind of like, how am I thinking of this and what's practical and what's appropriate too as well. And so when policies come into play, we have to clearly think from the United States perspective. We're kind of a fee for service moving to a value-based outcomes kind of model, but there's a lot of conflicting goals and objectives in that model that are challenging in a, for lack of a better word, for a for-profit environment as a whole. That said, So from a policy perspective, we really have to reflect on where we're talking about. Are we talking about East Asia? Are we talking about European Union? Are we talking about Eastern Europe? Are we talking the far? So that is one thing. And what really drives, there's two things that come to mind that drive a big part of that. One is the demographics. When you think of the Japanese demographics, you know, they're one of the oldest populations on the planet in an industrialized country. Italy, another one. I mean, we're all getting there, and it's going to get bigger and bigger, right? That population of senior citizens or an older population. And with that comes greater consumption of care. So that's why it's so important when we think of policy, I think, is to focus on the wellness and prevention versus the sick care model of where we get sick and then we look for care. But what's the wellness and prevention? And what to get there, we have to really think about how we engage that patient population, and I'll call it a people population, because they're not necessarily sick or a patient, but how do we create a healthy and well community? And I'll say community, whether that's a country or whether that's a region or, you know, that's a town. It's how do we create that? And I think that has a big part to do with policy, because policies, you know, established at that kind of governance level. And then I think that the big change is going to happen when we can provide better literacy, health literacy to individuals. Health literacy has shown that it really does drive a sicker community or sicker population because they're just not aware of whether it's healthy eating or healthy foods and so on, and food security. The other element I would say is social determinants of health, where it's almost like low-hanging fruit. Oh, you can't get your medications because you can't drive. You're not, you know, you have these health issues because you're not eating well. Well, to eat well, I don't have enough money, or it's not accessible to me. So there's lots of social determinants of health as well shown how, and health literacy. And I would say those two elements, if we can start, and then I would say underlying all that, I'm very focused on what's scalable and impactful. Talking to a head of innovation for a really large health insurance company and saying, we can't do pilots anymore. We can do pilots, but we can't do, like, you know, 3-month studies kind of thing. We really have to think about, if they are pilots and they are studies, then what's the journey? What's the pathway to scale and impact? Because if you don't understand scale and impact, and the sustainable scale and impact, then what you're doing is something that's marginally better. And look at, I think marginal or incremental improvement is great. It's just not where I'm not wired that way. I don't know if it's because I started in the space shuttle, it was 1 billion parts.
I was about to say, I think you went to space, Tim. I think you're not wired to be small change.
It could be. But that's what I think about the policies and stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think part of it, I will say, like, not everything is scalable, but coming back to our early point about the drug discovery process and kind of really shortening that cycle of discovery, the same thing is going to happen in healthcare. I think it's a matter of us as humanity and our communities and countries and health systems kind of coming together and putting in policy that is equal for all and access for all, and
right.
kind of that.
Yeah, you did ask us the second part of that 2A, 2B, and 2C question was the idea of how we're thinking about that. And how we're thinking about that is, you know, I've been in technology a long time, and technology, we all know, has a certain shelf life. I mean, the volume that is increasing is doubling every 6 months now, the volume of data. So it's not like we don't, it's not almost like we don't have a choice about machine learning and AI in that way, because volume and, we go data, information, and knowledge, right? In that kind of hierarchy or topology. And there's so much information, so much data, and that to turn it into knowledge it's absolutely impossible for a human being to connect all those dots like a chat GPT does. And so when I think of this, I'm thinking that what we really need to think about is what are those things that can be innovative and if not revolutionary that are not necessarily technology. So ours is workforce models. And what we were thinking is that, again, so many clinicians are leaving the workforce. The COVID pandemic just accelerated that dramatically. In 2022, I don't know if you guys saw this, but 102,000 physicians quit. 102,000 in just the US. That's that leaves such a void. And so we have to think about these new workforce models that can be win-win-win scenarios. Society wins, the clinician wins, the patient wins, and the stakeholders can win as well. So what we look at it is, okay, so what's a workforce model that is first and foremost is compelling to the clinician and the patient, and is attractive to them. And so what do they want? So we did a very deep study on what were the barriers that prevented clinicians from wanting to deliver care anymore. And what they were is really a lot around empowerment. When you work, 2.6 million out of 4 million nurses are working in hospitals, and it's a very structured environment, or they're working in physician practices. And notoriously, nurses have had limited, and I say nurses as a profession, whether it's a nurse practitioner, PA, or RN, or so on. So I think a nursing profession, Florence Nightingale's version. Truly, she was the first data statistician, actually, for nurses. And so think about the idea that what we really want to do is think about that global workforce as a network. And the idea is, if we empower nurses, in this particular case, and it's applicable to other roles, by the way, if we think about what their availability is as in terms of their capacity to deliver care on a global level, let's say you have 10 nurses and they all work 8 hours a day, just sake of argument, and they all have 2 extra hours in a day to do other work, that taking care of other patients. Why not take those other 2 hours, which is a whole nother FTE or more, and say, oh, if you want to work, we can connect you someplace else in the world. So what we're doing is applying supply chain management and capacity planning to intellectual capital, people. I have a slide that says it's human capital is key. And it's you guys, it's the clinicians, it's the physicians, the nurses, all you guys that really understand that domain area, and you got into that profession because you wanted to help people, and the system has forced it so that it's so untenable with life-work balance and with all the other dynamics within healthcare, that people say, I'd rather just go do something else, or just retire, or find some other job in administration or life sciences rather than delivering patient care. So we actually have to think about, how do we make the idea of being a clinician delivering patient care as an attractive option, as an attractive pathway, and keep people in the ecosystem of healthcare, albeit as a entrepreneur. But more businesses were created in 2021, 2022 than the previous 5 years. So people want to be entrepreneurs, they want to have empowerment, and then they own it. And then what we're doing is really connecting those independent, what I call clinicians as entrepreneurs, connecting them in a network and letting them share best practices, let them share resources if that's the case, let them share their journey, and be able to actually deliver care in a much more fluid way on a global level. And that's what we're trying to do.
And I think, you know, the idea I think you hit the nail on the head there are about it's all of these clinicians, myself included, got into the healthcare because we wanted to help patients. We wanted to care for patients. We wanted to care for the sick and the ill. And the system that we are within or have been forced to work within, for a lot, you know, good, bad, ugly, whatever the system, it is what it is, has really taken away the autonomy of our practice and ability to really connect with patients on a human level because of the time constraints and the systematic constraints that are put on us in our daily practices. And I think technology, again, to your point, is technology and innovative business models and entrepreneurship are helping kind of change that and bring that, for lack of a better word, nostalgia back to practice, because it really needs to, for me, when I chose to go into medicine, it was a calling. I'm not so sure that's the case nowadays. And I'm also not so sure that all of these clinicians, over 100,000 physicians in the US, kind of quitting clinical practice, are inspiring another generation to not go into medicine. And that's the fear of kind of not being able to address fully what that workforce pipeline will look like in 10 years. We already have a shortage. And if we are not inspiring the next generation to go into healthcare, we're going to have an even bigger shortfall in the next.
I've said this for the last couple of years, and probably I should stop saying it, but it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I'll tell you, I haven't been as optimistic as I have with every day I learn more about machine learning and AI and its capabilities of reducing the onerous aspect of this transition in healthcare from we document everything. You know, the ICD-10, you know, concept, you know, it's the micronutia of, you know, delivering care, you know, and we totally recognize the need for equating services or value with price and reimbursement. Totally understand that. At the same point in time, where I'm optimistic is that clinicians spend maybe 2 hours a day on documentation after they've seen all their patients.
Minimum, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is an easy, almost low-hanging fruit for AI to actually, you know, really help with reducing that. The number, I mean, telemedicine, again, evolution of care in the last 3 years. Just imagine that. I know MGB, Mass General Brigham, had, I think it was 2%, maybe less than that, for telemedicine before COVID for primary care. And during COVID, it was like 48% was telemedicine, telehealth. And what we're thinking about is, again, think about the efficiency. The assumption is that, or assertion is that you can see 5 more patients per day with a hybrid model with telehealth. So you're, again, go ahead. Yeah.
I was going to say too, I think to your point, it's where there's a will, there's a way, and policies can be written and adapted to allow for care to be delivered, because that shift happened at MGB as an example.
Right.
It wasn't that the technology wasn't there. The technology was
Right.
there and has been there for
Right.
well over a decade, right?
Right.
There wasn't a will from both the patient's point of view as well as the provider and healthcare organization point of view. So I'm going to shift and kind of, we're coming to a close of our session, but I would want to close with, what advice do you have for clinicians who are actively working, or budding clinicians who are still in school and thinking about how AI is going to impact their future, and what should they do to prepare themselves?
Yeah, I'll back up on my analogy that before, Dipu, that said that it was like a stethoscope. It's more like a medicine bag. It's more like a medicine bag, right? Because it's just got so many compartments in which it can be utilized, whether it's on the administrative side or it's on the clinical diagnostic treatment planning side, whether it's the orchestration of the workers and the workforce to create more efficiency. whether it's in life sciences for reduction of cycle time for discovery of medications and drugs and so on, supply chain management, and how we move drugs around the whole world to give people better access to medications. So my first instinct is to say that you have to be curious, and so for the ones that are already in healthcare right now, you just have to try something. I mean, our friend Anthony talks about our job is to put tools in the hands of clinicians. I will just add that to patients too. And so the more we can collaborate with clinicians and the more we can converge on our respective fields and domains of expertise, the better we're going to be able to get really truly valuable work out of that collaboration. So my first instinct is to just say, try, Microsoft's Copilot if you like Microsoft, if you like Bard for Google, or you like ChatGPT. It doesn't matter, but it has such extraordinary power. And I'll only leave with that. There are guardrails that need to be up around governance and transparency. And I heard of a new one where someone did a legal brief, and the AI tool actually created regulatory cases that didn't exist. And then so we're thinking, right, hallucinating them. And so we talk about healthcare, and we think about healthcare for a second, and we say, okay, so, well, let's say it hallucinates around healthcare. So I was thinking, what if it says, oh, here's a disease for you, and it created a new disease. But maybe that disease is an accurate new disease because it's looked at different things and kind of identified something. So I think the answer or response to that is, it's not a silver bullet of any sort. It is not to replace the human brain. So for the providers in the industry, in healthcare now, taking care of patients, it's a toolbox. It's like a medical tool bag, if you will, and it has certain tools, and you have to just explore and be curious about how can it solve the most important problem that you have right now. It's a pain point. Here's a pain point. How do I apply AI to it? And that's it. And all the data and the large language modules and the algorithms and all the other wordy stuff, forget it. Just find a problem. Think about how a solution might look if you just imagined it with using paper mache, and then think about how it would work, using a ChatGPT, and ask ChatGPT or Bard or Microsoft's Copilot, which looks very cool, to ask it what the answer is, right, to create the draft for what the answer might be to that particular problem. And it's a little circular, and it becomes even more powerful when you start bolting in with data scientists and data engineers and programmers, developers, the ability to pull data points from your own environment, your own organization, whether it's a life sciences or it's a hospital or it's a healthcare practice, and brings in data from your own environment, not data from the 700 million points of data that it's collecting from the LLM or the insights it's projecting, but rather data that's pertinent to how you're running and operating and working every day. So I think keeping it simple, but doing something, I think is the best way to think about that. The ones getting into healthcare today, I can't, I'm not you guys. All I can do is guess. I blew it on organic chemistry, so I tried that, whole doctor thing, and it wasn't for me. And so my first thing is to say, if you're in school, think about combining the technology with the concept of medicine. Combine technology with medicine, much like computer science and economics. Where am I going to apply? I got all this computer science now where do I apply it? I got all this medicine, but what tools can I use to actually be better at it? Because ultimately, if thought leaders like Anthony and others, and Jay Chang and others, and Harvey Castro are correct, and I think they are. Is I think of myself almost as a futurist, but the idea is it's going to be the standard operating procedures.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, using that tool is going to be okay. Would you listen, you know, to someone's chest without a stethoscope? Would you use a cup or something to hear something? No, you wouldn't. And that's the kind of out of the box, I think, thinking that we need to consider. And then the last thing is just how fast we adopted the radio. And I'll go back to that, you know, the speed or the velocity of adoption for whether it's the internet or whether it's laptops or whatever your example wants to be. This is going to accelerate so much faster because it's almost recursive in how it builds. One, and two is we as technology people, organizations, you know, there's a saying that says every company is a technology company, but still with a fundamental understanding about humanity and the things we do and don't do, realize that the technology is gonna accelerate everything. And the technology is going to just be a tool for you as a human being, whether it's creative in the arts or whether it's medicine or what have you. It's still not going to replace you as a human being. It's just going to add to your ability to do, I think, more meaningful, creative, and impactful kinds of work.
I think, and from my lens as an educator and as a clinician, I think one of the fears that we have is that this technology is going to replace you. And I think that's not the right way of thinking about it because it's a tool. It's more that this technology is going to elevate your critical thinking skills. It's not that you won't need to know the medicine, but you will need to know how to apply the medicine through the use of these tools for the future.
Right.
It's, you know, patients are going to come in and ask you, oh, did you put my symptoms through the AI algorithm? And you should be informed enough as a clinician of the future to say, yes, I did, and it gave me XYZ, but here's what I'm thinking from a human perspective, looking at you, and or no, I didn't, because this algorithm is flawed in XYZ manner. And I think that's the elevation in critical thinking that we as in my current role as educators are going to be moving towards. And again, I think I agree with you that, you know, Anthony and Harvey's of this world who are saying that things are going to change in the next 10 years. I would even argue less than that.
I think every 2 years we're going to see
every day, you know, every single day there's something new in there. So
and it's hard to kind of keep that in your brain, you know, and say, okay, so how do I make that practical, you know, and stuff, and I you know, without our blame, you know, kind of blowing up, because it is a challenge, and at the same point in time, think of it as a tool and nothing more than a tool, but it's a highly sophisticated and transformative tool. And you can use the buggy whip in, you know, the cars, or, you know, the horse and wagon in the car and the automobile, the radio, the television. I mean, we have all kinds of examples, basic examples that work for all of us, and on how adoption, the velocity of adoption of change has happened, and how this tool called AI is really going to, I'm really optimistic on its ability to help clinicians balance better the work that we're asking you guys to do, one, and I think it's going to help patients to a degree, that we can provide the right tools, the right governance, the right transparency, the right genesis for insights, and so on. It's going to help patients because patients have to become more self-managed, because the alternative is, like, back to health literacy, they don't become aware of what it is to have diabetes or COPD or, you know, asthma or whatever, and they're just trying to manage it in a very cryptic kind of way. We're still poking ourselves for, you know, A1Cs or blood sugar, you know, but I'm very optimistic. I think people, like all the people we know, and Mona Sascaris, who's on my board, who was a fellow at Intel for 25 years, who was on his third startup and building chips that will drive AI kinds of processing power, or Lorraine Pratt, who wrote a book on decision making in AI and how to make sure that the decisions are framed appropriately, so that we're driving the right outcomes with the right governance model, with the right processes and so on. But we've done these transformations. I mean, an easy one to think about is going from, on-premises servers, computers, to the cloud. 10 years ago, I had lots of conversations with really large healthcare systems. You need to go to the cloud. No, we're not going to the cloud. No, we're not going. They're all in the cloud now. So, this is the kind of, there's going to be a tipping point, and I think that tipping point is 2 years away at most.
I would agree, and I also share your optimism about healthcare. Tim, Samard, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Do we have questions from the audience?
Yeah, hi. We did have a few questions coming in, but the answers to those questions are already covered in this discussion. Yeah. So
Tim is a thorough guest. So
yeah, so this was a fantastic session, and AI will empower our workforce, enable responsible evidence and data-based care, reduce physician burnout to a great extent. And adaptation, education, and evolution will be the key for all healthcare professionals. Fantastic insights from Tim and Dipu in episode 4. Thank you for joining in. Best wishes on your efforts towards a better tomorrow.
thank you.
Thank you. You as well. Thank you, Dr. Gupta. Thank you, Dipu. We'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm sure that your insights have undoubtedly left our listeners inspired and informed. Thank you. And as we conclude this remarkable session, a huge thank you to our incredible audience for tuning in. Mark your calendars for October 16th as we return with our next episode, ChatGPT for Healthcare Professionals, packed with even more insights and invaluable information. Stay tuned and be a vital part of the conversation. And before we conclude, I encourage you to explore our MedSynapse platform. It offers a unique opportunity to engage in enriching discussions, connect with esteemed medical professionals, and contribute to the progress of healthcare. Until next time, take care, stay healthy, goodbye.